Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Diana, would you be so kind as to hand me the morning paper? Archie turned to his wife, Diana, sitting in a large, deep armchair next to the fireplace. The man was well into his 50s, but he still looked good and tried to keep as mobile as possible, which, however, did not prevent him from occasionally asking small but nice favors of his wife. Diana was 10 years younger than her husband, but kept a sharp mind and in every way to maintain its lustrous appearance good. The means for this the couple had. "Of course, darling," Diana murmured, and then rose gracefully from the long dining table where she preferred to drink coffee and handed her husband the morning paper, shining her new manicure in front of him. "Thank you, darling," Archie replied, smiling dazzlingly. From the outside, it might seem that the Stones were the sort of people who tended to live a somewhat pretentious and ostentatious life, but that wasn't really the case. The couple really owned a solid business company engaged in the manufacture of individual furniture to order, but conducted their business honestly from start to finish, taking care that the client was satisfied and received their project in detail, in the beautiful execution of cabinetry and on time. Business for them was not a simple set of numbers or a method of quick enrichment furniture. In the understanding of the Stones, equated to a real work of art and served not only exclusively practical purposes, but also aesthetic, creating in the house of the unique atmosphere that could as if personify its entire design with the owners themselves, revealing through the furnishings of the house of their character. Although their fortune could not compare with the multi-million-dollar earnings of people from the top lines of ratings of the magazine Forbes, all the same, the case it gave a fairly stable income, thanks to which in this Stones were absolutely uelicini. Their family will live in wealth and material well-being for many years. The couple had met over 30 years ago when they were both still at university. And since then, the young people have never parted for a minute. After living so many years soul to soul, the couple Stone learned one simple truth, which in their opinion, and allowed this union to last so long. When the passions and first love fades to replace them in the family comes mutual respect and a true, deep understanding of the characters and needs of his partner. Archie and Diana, over the years, had had time to study and accept each other as they are. This, in turn, allowed the couple to avoid not only global quarrels, but also minor misunderstandings that can poison life no less than the most audacious of treason. Suspicion, lies, subterfuge about this couple Stone never heard, and even, what a sin, proud of their exemplary marriage. But even more than an ideal union and clearly via Lacinum, favorite business Stone family was proud of their own son John. When the child was born, Archie and Diane thought they were the happiest people on the planet. Since John's childhood, he was given a huge amount of attention from his parents. Despite the fact that the couple worked almost around the clock to develop their business, they managed to somehow do without nannies and hired tutors, completely independently engaged in the upbringing and health of their son. Diana never neglected her maternal duties, always finding the opportunity to carve out a little time to study with John or read him a bedtime story. Archie, too, could calmly explain to his associates in the middle of a business meeting that he needed to step away for a moment to call home and check on the baby. The man always put his family first, so at weekends he tried to spend as much time as possible with his wife and son, playing with the latter and spending pleasant hours with Diana, who at such times always tried to push the conversation away. Always tried to put their work together on the back burner. The couple worked in the same company, but headed different departments, so sometimes they did not cross paths in their office for weeks. The years passed quickly, and then Stefan turned from a small, modest boy into a tall, broad-shouldered, handsome man with a lustrous mop of light blonde hair, a charming smile, and always cheerful, light brown eyes. John took the best of both parents, his father's pleasant, masculine appearance with his athletic build, and his mother's razor-sharp, analytical mind. Diana could not be pleased, watching how cleverly her son solves first crossword puzzles in children's magazines, and then in adult newspapers, and even in collections of the best crossword puzzles in the world, and later on, complex algebra equations, which he cracked like peanuts. It is not surprising that with such phenomenal abilities, Stefan decided to enroll not anywhere, but in the mathematics department, The boy dreamed that with the help of high-precision measurements, he would be able, in the future, to develop entire algorithms for automated control of complex industrial machinery. Actually, on all of the above features, the similarity of Stefan with his parents ended. Contrary to the widespread opinion that in such families the apple does not fall far from the apple, in the Stone family was the exact opposite. Sometimes Archie imagined that their son, at a very early age, accidentally replaced in the maternity hospital, so different from the character of his own parents. And the older the son became, the more vividly these differences became apparent. In this case, it was not about bad habits. Rather, it was a matter of John's special perception of the world around him and his position in it. So, for every opinion of Stone Sr. and his wife, the son had his own often completely opposite point of view. This was especially true of the way Stefan's parents conducted business and about the direct participation of the heir himself in the affairs of the family business. In short, Stefan, as smart as he was, didn't want to be part of his parents' company. The boy dreamed of supercomputers and calculating linear algorithms, but not of someday heading a company of cabinet makers and taking his father's place in the director's chair. Because of this, the happy family often had conflicts, in the course of which Zavyalov Jr. always zealously defended his point of view and was ready to go in this matter literally straight through. Son, you understand. We can't do this without you. In this business without you, Archie tried to tell Stefan. This business, it was built by me and your mother for years. Decades, you might say. Naturally, I can't put some left-handed person in the director's seat, and I never wanted to. You and only you should take over the reins, son, you understand. Besides, who told you can't run a company with your digital hobby? Check contracts, keep track of materials, control everything, and in your spare time you can do whatever you want. Honestly, I don't see what the problem is here. Stefan's hazel eyes darkened momentarily, not boding well for his parents. A problem? Really, what could be the problem here, Dad? The young man asked sarcastically. By day, you assemble tables and chairs for Perlislisonimi clients, and at night you design rockets. Is that it? Father, don't you think it's physically impossible to combine such things? John, you're dramatizing this again. Diane interjected. That's not what Dad is saying. He's trying to say that no matter how big your hobby is, and no matter how important it may seem to you today, it could change tomorrow. And you should be prepared that your great math knowledge and analytical skills will never go to waste because you have a family business to support and develop. And that your father and I will be happy to put in your hands and no one else's. Mom! Her daughter's scream was still in her ears, tearing her eardrums. Mommy! The woman's head darted across the pillow to the right, to the left, as if the woman would. So tell me, dear parents, that you have already planned my whole life by minutes. How I will live, where to work. Maybe you also picked up a bribe for me in advance? Looking at his mother unhappily, the boy folded his arms on his chest. His father loudly slammed his palm on the table. Stop talking to your mother like that. I don't understand. Where did you get that stubborn spirit from? We had a normal life. So what happened? What happened, Father, is that I've grown up. I am now. I'm a grown man, damn it, and I have the right to decide for myself how I want to live my life and what I want to do. And yes, I do intend to get married. Just so you know, I'm not going to change my mind. Diana clutched her heart and slowly settled into the chair. Mary, she asked weakly, holding the lapel of her tweed jacket. How? But when? To whom? It seemed to the woman that the house suddenly ran out of oxygen, and she couldn't breathe. Diana, my dear, Archie cried out, running up to his wife. What can I get you, please? Water? Valerian? Whoa, Valerie, water and valerian. Finally, the wife was able to breathe out. The father of the family immediately rushed to the kitchen. On the way, angrily grabbed his son by the sleeve. Look what you've brought your mother to. Are you out of your mind? Who would say such a thing? Who would say such things like that? You should have told us on our wedding day. Go and apologize to your mother immediately. What kind of a revolutionary? Archie went to the kitchen to get the medicine. Stefan squatted down in front of his mother and took her hand. His indignation was replaced by concern for Diana's well-being. Mom, okay. I'm sorry I blurted it out so hastily. I just haven't had a chance to tell you about it yet. You've been going on and on about this internship. Head office, head office. You have to do an internship in our head office, so I had given up hope that you would give me something to decide for myself in this life. And Alice, she's wonderful, you'll see. Alice? Still in the same weak voice, the mother asked. What Alice? The one from Blossom's family of diplomats? A faint hope slipped into the woman's words, but Stefan only shook his head. No, Mom. Alice Walker. She's from my class, remember? The dark one. Diana's hopes were dashed. Yeah, she remembered who. This Alice Walker. What was that? Alice who came from a family of farmers? From the village? Oh. The young man's mother clutched at her heart again. At that time, her husband arrived with a glass of water in one hand and a bottle of valerian in the other. Here, my love. Come on, I have exactly 12 drops, as the doctor prescribed. The man gave the woman the life-saving medicine, gently holding her back. Diana took a sip and nodded her head toward her son, addressing her husband. All right, Archie. It's about time. Our son decided to marry a provincial. Everything. Studies, plans. It's all gone. He and his young wife are going to build rockets right in the middle of the field. Why? It'll be an interesting collaboration, promising. Stefan jumped to his feet, scaring his mother once again. Here we go. That's what I was talking about. You don't let me breathe without analyzing my every move. You mom should have worked in the civil service in the organs. You'd have all the criminals confess their deeds at once. You wouldn't even have to torture them. Your sarcasm would have done it all for you. Ah, well, stop the bickering, shouted at his son Zavialov Sr. Immediately calmed down and explained clearly. What's going on here? What provincial girl? What fields with missiles? Stefan, breathing more air into his chest, ruffled his wheat hair with his fist and began a detailed story. It turned out that their son had actually met Alice at university. They were both in their final year, but in different groups. As it turned out, the young man has long been looking at a pretty dark-haired girl with incredibly deep blue eyes, but couldn't quite make the first move. The fact was that Alice Walker always behaved very modestly, and against the background of her other classmates seemed too withdrawn. The girl did not attend general parties, did not go to clubs with the group, and did not tolerate alcohol. Instead, Alice preferred to spend all her free time or in the laboratory, where she tested different formulas and variants of algorithms from her last term paper, or in the library, where she constantly found new books on the subject of her diploma. The student did not hide her scientific ambitions. She very much wanted to win the final competition of student works, the main prize of which would be a study in a master's program on a completely free basis. A budget place at the school where Alice and Stefan were studying was almost always a rarity, and there was no need to talk about a master's program. Many students even took out a special loan to get the opportunity to study in their desired profile. That's why winning the competition, like anything else, interested Alice, and she did not intend to be distracted and spend her precious time on anything else but endless study and practice. With John Stone, the girl was brought together by pure chance. One day, Alice stayed in the laboratory, rooting over the next experiment, and accidentally forgot to turn off one clever apparatus, which helped in her work. Outside the window that evening, a thunderstorm was gathering long and hard, and at the moment when the girl was about to leave the study room, there was a sudden flash of lightning in the sky. The electrical charge instantly hit the lightning rod on the roof of the classroom building where the girl was studying at the time. Apparently, the lab's wiring failed, because the next second there was a menacing hissing sound, and the device exploded with a shower of blinding sparks. Alice cried out in surprise and fear, and immediately rushed into the corridor to look for help. At any moment, the fire in the lab was in danger of spreading outside the classroom. And that's when Alice bumped into Stefan, who was returning from his last class, thinking on the way about the topic of his future paper at the fall conference. The student literally stamped into the guy so that he just miraculously stayed on his feet. Walker. From surprise, Stefan didn't immediately realize that she might not even know that they were in the same department. What are you doing here? What's wrong? Alice's blue eyes widened involuntarily. How do you know my name? there's a fire. The lab's on fire. Just then, the tangy scent of smoke and burning plastic reached Stefan's sense of smell. On the opposite wall of the corridor began to dance fire glare, and only at this moment, the air around the young people literally shook with the sound of a fire siren. Were you there alone? There was no one else. Trying to shout the shrill sound, asked the girl Stefan. She shook her head negatively. The loud sounds frightened Alice, making her, against her will, cling harder to her companion. Stefan put one arm around the girl, and then they hurried out of the corridor. The firemen arrived 10 minutes later, by which time the lab room had almost completely burned out. After the fire was completely extinguished, the police also arrived on the scene, who, having drawn up a protocol, demanded explanations from Alice. The girl did not hide the fact that the fire started in front of her, and now tried to explain to the police and the rector how exactly it happened. The rector was, to put it mildly, not happy about what had happened. He was now only interested in who would cover the cost of repairing the lab and the equipment inside. Alice, do you have any idea how much all this stuff cost? Just a rough estimate, huh? There was equipment, the price of which was tens of thousands of dollars. Who will buy us a new one now? Maybe you, or maybe your farming parents. The girl sank down and stood in front of the rector with her head down. She was well aware that the sum he had mentioned was extremely large. Stefan, who knew that the girl's parents were modest and couldn't afford to cover even a tenth of the expenses, boldly stepped forward. Come on, I'll help fix it. I can give the money in installments as the rebuilding progresses. The rector opened his mouth to object, but at that moment the fire chief approached them. The fire brigade chief, who had arrived to investigate the incident, approached them. You're counting students' money for nothing, Alexander, he began after greeting them. The case is an insurance case. The wiring should have been changed a long time ago. The fire would have occurred under any scenario, even if the girl had turned off the appliance. The mains just couldn't cope with the tenfold increase in load. Alexander squinted unpleasantly, but had to agree with the fireman's arguments. The wiring in this building has not been changed for many years. Stefan and Alice finally let go. The rector limited himself to a strict reprimand to the students, and the next day, the administration of the institution held a large extraordinary meeting at which they were detailed briefing on fire safety. Alice was impressed by the way Stefan stood up for her in front of the rector, and from that moment on, the two young people struck up a pleasant acquaintance, which soon developed into a friendship. They were both very passionate about science. And then something more. The affair lasted about 6 months before Stefan finally decided to propose to Alice. And now, embarrassed and stammering in the most emotional places, he was telling his parents, "So what's that supposed to mean? You've been dating for 6 months, and you for all this time, not even a single word, not a single hint did not mention that you have a girlfriend." Diana lamented, "Son, well, you just like a knife in my heart stabbed to my family, the most dear people. And you didn't say anything." "Yes, Stefan, it's not good," Archie muttered after his mother. "I don't argue, you probably have a good girl. But why get married in the first place? We could have gone out for a year or two, met. A lot of couples do that nowadays. Test their feelings, see how they feel." Stefan once again apologized to his mother and father, but now he looked more concerned. Diana complained, "I'd only seen a glimpse of Alice, of course. At the general meeting of the university community, she was a pretty little thing. But mark my word, we'll cry with her and her parents. Provincials, what are they like? All they care about. To get a bigger piece of the action here in the capital. Stefan says she's an excellent student. She's dreaming of a master's degree science. Maybe so, I don't doubt it. But that's the only reason why she's dreaming, because she wants to get a foothold. Yes, and won ours. She only needs our one as an anchor. If she's so smart, she must have some kind of plan. And her parents." "Diana, why are you so categorical in your opinion about Alice?" Tried to soften the heated atmosphere of the father of the family. "Do you think our son is so stupid that he will allow himself to be fooled at the last major?" The couple were in their bedroom getting ready for bed. Archie was checking the economic news on his laptop, as he always did, and Diana was sitting in front of the mirror, applying a refreshing facial moisturizer to her face. All she could think about was how cleverly the faceless Alice Walker was ready to ensnare their son. My dear, our son is first and foremost. Is a man, and that's a fait accompli. I'm sorry. Think back to when you were his age. How much thought did you give to chasing after a pretty girl? Archie closed the lid of his laptop, looking skeptically at his wife over his reading glasses. I didn't have time for, as you put it, pretty girls, he said in a low voice. I was working in a furniture factory while I was at university. Where you and I met, by the way. So the only girl in my life has always been and still is you, my dear. Diana turned around, slyly looking at her husband. Oh, flatterer, what a flatterer. Always find what word to say to a woman to make her melt. But let's get back to our sheep. That is, to Alice. The husband rolled his eyes quietly without his wife seeing. He realized that his son had not chosen the most enviable bride. But it was still his choice. There was nothing he could do about it. Her parents are probably some drunkards from the village. I know what I'm talking about. God, how many of them I've seen on business trips. One thing about farmers, they cover themselves with a nice foreign name, but they still drink. And still drink. And the only farming they have. Only potatoes and zucchini, the woman concluded, smearing cream on her hands. So now we have to be related to these Alkanauts? No way. Their daughter is a piranha, of course. But I'm a shark, you know. I'm a bigger shark than most. The businessman just sighed. What do you suggest? I mean, we can't just ignore their invitation. And ignore their invitation. And if they then, God forbid, in the press about this denounce? What will people say about us? Diana moved to the bed, closer to her husband, and definitely closed the lid of his portable computer. And about this, my dear, you and I are going to think now, she murmured. You understand, this wedding cannot be allowed. We are Stones, not the last people in town, and with the hillbillies we in Messalliance with categorically contraindicated. Therefore, we must come up with something, so that these provincials will run away from us like fire. Then it should be something, well, very unusual, suggested the businessman. They should be so hooked that they then went in shock for a week. Diana suddenly squinted. She clearly had some interesting idea, which she hurried to share with her husband. Why? It's an idea. You can beat the wedge out of the wedge, as they say. Jacob and the Walkers were preparing a big dinner party for their matchmakers, whom they would finally meet this Sunday. It was going to be a big dinner party, and it was important to make a good impression on their future in-laws. So they had the help of their daughter Alice and their future son-in-law Stefan. Sergio, do you think I should order duck from Paramount from the market, or should I get it at the supermarket? Meat can dry out in the oven. If the quality is not good, Alice's mother was worried. She wanted to impress the rich matchmakers. Stefan didn't hide the fact that his parents were well-to-do from the bride and her parents. Jacob, meanwhile, was making his own wine list, looking at the specialty stores on a large website devoted to the local wine industry. He wanted to buy a couple bottles of red for dinner, but he couldn't decide on the best value for money. Of course, you can get it at the market, Elizabeth, her husband said without hesitation. Have you ordered a bird for Paramount? The wife groaned and rushed to call the merchant, while Alice and Stefan, who were sitting in the kitchen, continued to make a menu of appetizers and salads. The dinner had to be perfect, and the couple decided to achieve this at any cost, even if they had to go broke on a couple of avocados and a whole pineapple. Alice's parents were indeed visiting farmers from the province. Walker's family, after a long life in the village, was able to save a small amount of money to settle in the city and finally relax. They were able to afford to buy a small house on the outskirts of the city, with an adjacent plot of land on a couple of acres, where Elizabeth built a small vegetable garden for herself and her daughter, and Jacob was able to put the long-awaited barbecue, on which he planned to cook kebabs all year round. Previously, he simply did not have enough time for this. When asked why they decided to move to the capital now, the Walker couple always replied that they had already lived in the village long enough, tired, they said, because their age is not young. Jacob was already well over 60, while his wife had just recently celebrated her 50th birthday. Alice was a late child. Perhaps that was why she wanted to get as much out of higher education as possible. She realized that it was her turn to take care of her parents, and that would require a lot of money, which she could get only by showing great success in her studies and later, in a high-paying job related to advanced technology. Otherwise, the Walker family was very discreet, even a little secretive. They didn't talk much about how they had become farmers. Stefan only knew that they worked very hard on the land and had their own cattle, which, due to their age, were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. After their daughter graduated from high school, the family decided to sell off what was left of the farm and use the proceeds to move to the city. Here, they had only recently felt like real townspeople, slowly adapting and getting used to the accelerated pace of life in the capital. Sunday morning came. Stefan came to Alice's house in advance to help her and her parents set the table and prepare some dishes for serving. When everything was ready, the young couple couldn't help but notice that the table looked perfect. In the middle stood a huge dish with cut, beautiful slices of fruit, the crown of which was a huge golden pineapple, towering like a flagpole above all the other dishes. 3 kinds of salads, beautifully arranged in layers in porcelain salad bowls with an elegant oriental pattern, were given to the upcoming guests to choose from. Besides, on the table there were several smaller plates with appetizers and 3 bottles of fine red and white wine, personally chosen by the owner of the house for the arrival of future relatives. The finale of this belly feast was to be the Peking duck, which was languishing in the oven at that moment, and a large caramel chocolate cake, carefully chilled in the refrigerator, as it was made by Elizabeth herself according to a special family recipe. The meeting was set for 6 in the evening. I had to hand it to Alice's parents. Jacob wore his best suit, complete with new leather boots, and his wife wore a very stylish dress, reminiscent of the 50s, but more modern and austere. In a word, to the meeting of matchmakers, the Walkers were ready in all arms. However, unlike the parents of the bride, the Stones made completely different plans, the main of which was to prevent a possible mésalliance by any means at their disposal. That evening, the couple have long discussed various options for how they will forever turn their Stefan from this careless family Walker, led by their predator, daughter. In the end, in their heads they matured a plan, the originality of which could envy the Trojan horse of the ancient Greeks, wishing to finally divorce son with the bride, who, in their understanding, belonged to a much less prestigious social stratum. Spouses decided to come to the meeting in the oldest, well-worn rags, which, and to take to the cottage was a pity, so it was decrepit. The calculation of the groom's parents was as follows. Pretending to be the last of the poor, Archie and Diana would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They would make a fool of their son in front of Alice, who, as the mother thought, was already counting their money in her mind, and would scare off the hated matchmakers, because they were aware that their future son-in-law, the heir to the furniture empire. "Imagine Archie," said Diana happily, twirling round in front of the mirror and looking at her reflection in it. "They will see us, and they will realize at once that, first of all, John has cheated them, that he is not a rich man, so there is no point in pretending, and they will show their real face, their selfish intentions. And secondly, what?" Impatiently asked her husband, who did not much like the idea. "And secondly, they will immediately become clear that to take from us nothing. And then this Alice herself will get rid of our son." Diana deftly snapped her fingers, as if to strengthen her words, and then looked at her watch. "Well, we can start. The time is just right." Having thrown a last glance at herself in the mirror, the businesswoman smiled gloatingly. Asterisk, 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 the Stones deliberately didn't show up on time. It was unprofitable for them to give the hostile party the impression of punctual, polite people, so they deliberately delayed the beginning of the meeting. Stefan was on pins and needles. He had never been so ashamed of his father's and mother's behavior. When he tried to call them, he heard the same thing every time. The device was temporarily out of service or out of range. Alice tried unsuccessfully to calm the boy down. "Calm down, John. Don't be so nervous. Maybe your relatives have some urgent business. You said they are very busy people, but not to that extent." The young man shook his head. And it's never happened before that they turned off their cell phones when they went to a meeting. They couldn't both have run out of battery, could they? Stefan got up from the table and tried calling his parents again. It was no use. The son of businessman felt in his gut, His ancestors were obviously up to something wrong, but what was it? Maybe, excuse me, of course, Stefan. Something suddenly happened to them. As she said these words aloud, Elizabeth mentally scolded herself. Well, now I'm going to scare the boy. He'll run away from us. Mother. Alice looked at her mother reproachfully. She was also on her feet, stroking Stefan's nervous arm. At that moment, the doorbell rang. A little over an hour had passed since the appointed time. Phew, well, thank God, Jacob exclaimed, and hurried down the hallway to open the door and let the long-awaited guests in. A moment later, there was silence in the hallway. Stefan, feeling a nasty sucking sensation in his gut, rushed to meet his parents and was stunned. Looking at his mother's and father's clothes, Stefan felt slightly dizzy. Alice, standing next to him, noticed how sharply her fiancé had turned pale. Well, Sonny, introduce us to your beloved. Carefully imitating the joy in her voice, Diana spread her arms in a welcoming embrace and immediately threw herself on the neck of the father of the bride. Roughly kissing him on both cheeks, she finally noticed Alice. Oh, and you? So you are Alice and is? How lovely. Let's hug too. Can I call you daughter? Stefan felt as if he had been plunged into ice-cold water. His ears ached and his lungs were suddenly short of oxygen. Alice hugged her future mother-in-law politely, said hello to Archie, and together with Jacob, they led everyone into the living room. Stefan was shocked not so much by his mother's over-the-top demeanor as by her appearance. She and his father were dressed as if they were about to go to the pier to beg for alms. Diana wore some decrepit, faded dress, over which she had not hesitated to throw an even older and more dilapidated robe. Instead of pantyhose, she wore dark blue gaiters, the kind one usually wore to beat the carpet in the morning. Instead of the luxurious shoes a woman was used to wearing, his mother's feet were in old rubber boots. Stefan was willing to bet that they had tattered socks underneath. Really, the boy couldn't imagine where his parents would have gotten so many old rags on them. His father was also good. An old tracksuit, sweatpants with bubbles on the knees, and high fishing boots. On his head, Stone Sr. probably wore a big summer Panama. Well, just like a city madman, no less. Stefan stared at his parents with a mute question in his eyes, but they acted as if they were dressed like that every day. Diana asked Elizabeth and Alice the strangest and most uncomfortable questions she could think of, and Archie kept insinuating to Jacob that he could have drunk more to the health of the young, and in the village is that the way to drink in the country. The atmosphere of friendliness was kept solely at the expense of the bride's parents, while Stefan soon began to resemble a dummy in a chair, unable to change anything in the current situation. Oh, but that bird you have is so gorgeous. Looking at the steaming turkey, Diana cooed. You probably slaughtered it yourself, didn't you? It wouldn't be the first time you took a bird's life, would it? How do you think it felt? Alice could hardly contain herself from laughing, but Stefan almost choked on his salad at those words. Mom, where did you get that from? He looked at his mother with a mixture of bitterness and indignation. It's all right. Elizabeth tried to defuse the situation, then smiled sweetly at Stone. I didn't slaughter the bird myself. I bought it at the market as a regular chicken. When we had a farm, I sometimes had to butcher birds, but it's a very different process. It's much less emotional and much more technical, isn't it? I hope I've answered your question. Very thoroughly, thank you, Diana said, wrinkling her nose. The level of nervousness and mutual misunderstanding continued to rise slowly. The more the groom's parents' speech became absurd. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and her husband looked at each other, wondering what motives Diana had in coming to dinner dressed as a homeless woman with a gorgeous shellac manicure. Did she really think that her $500 purse, now forgotten on the nightstand in the hallway, would not catch anyone's eye, as well as her husband's expensive watch, which he, however, honestly tried to hide in the sleeves of his shabby tracksuit? The Walkers, of course, immediately realized that everything that was going on, including the inadequate behavior of the matchmakers, only a prank. The only thing they didn't understand was the purpose of the joke. In any case, the parents of the bride did not want to spoil relations with the Stones at the stage of acquaintance, and therefore tried to treat their extravagant act with all the understanding inherent in them. Stefan, who was shocked by his parents' antics, noted to himself that the behavior of his future mother-in-law and father-in-law was worthy of real respect. Others, in their place, would have thrown out the careless matchmakers long ago. The Walkers, on the other hand, behaved as calmly and honorably as possible throughout the evening, and in the end they even called their future in-laws a cab when they complained that they had no money at all. "Jacob, I wish we had a place like yours," Archie jokingly patted Jacob on the shoulder. "But alas, not everyone can roast a turkey. Not everyone can knead cakes." "It's true," Diana said, mimicking her husband. "I sometimes don't even have enough money for a streetcar fare, let alone a dinner party. Thank you for inviting us, my dears. Now we'll see each other all the time." The woman smiled dazzlingly at Elizabeth, who felt a little twitchy at the smile, which seemed a little predatory, but she was able to hold back her emotions. "You are always welcome," she said, and then went to her room to order a cab for the matchmakers. When the groom's parents left, Stefan, going after them, apologized to Walker for his mother's and father's behavior, and then stayed a little longer to talk to Alice. "Alice, you'd apologize to me too. I don't understand what came over them. They're completely different. Obviously, they wanted to stand it out in front of your family, but this..." Alice only laughed softly, hugging her lover. "Don't worry. I don't know what the older ones have in their heads. Maybe they're jealous of me. The main thing that we found out today, your mother has a great sense of humor. I have not laughed so much for a month, honestly." The bride assured the guy that in their relationship nothing will change, despite this embarrassment with dinner, only if he himself felt calm and confident next to Alice and her parents. "As long as you are not shy with me, everything is fine," she told him honestly. "The rest will somehow, yes, to settle. Alice, you are the best." Stefan exhaled and kissed her softly, then hurried downstairs, following his eccentric family. Stefan did not say a single word in the cab, but glumly looked at his father and mother, who, by that time, had already gone out of character, and seeing his son's mood, also preferred to spend the rest of the road in silence. Diana was very glad in her heart. It seemed to her that her number had produced the desired effect on Walker, and now they themselves would hurry to disassociate from such relatives as the Stones could become for them, and their daughter in turn would begin to look for a new, even richer victim. Archie was quite satisfied with his game. He liked his son's bride, of course, and her parents appeared to be decent people, but a poor little house like the Walker family had would be hard to find. How were they all going to live there? Of course, the wife was right. At the first opportunity, the parents of the bride will certainly want to move to the luxurious estate of the Stones. But now they will not be able to do this. The father of the family counted on the fact that the father and mother of Alice recognized in the parents of the groom poor even more than they themselves, come to their senses, and do not want to breed poverty. The man hoped that the Walkers could talk their daughter out of a hasty and unnecessary wedding. None of the parents thought at that moment what it was like for their son. Stefan was really worried about the impression that his mother and father had made on his white parents, and he couldn't wait until they were inside the walls of their house so that they could finally dot the I's and cross the T's. Late that night, there was a real scandal in the Stone household. "Oh my God, I can't believe you do such a thing. I love her," Stefan shouted in anger. Stefan's mother stood in the middle of the room with her arms folded across her chest, just as her son had done not so long ago. "Stefan, calm down. Son, we did it all for your sake, to keep you away from the influence of this family." "What are you talking about, Mom? What influence? You should have been dragged out of there by the collar. You were acting like two crazy people." The guy was pacing the room, waving his hands at every sentence. "You better be careful with your words, son," the father threatened. "I don't doubt that we may have gone a little overboard somewhere, but it was necessary. Have you seen how they live? I wouldn't be surprised if in a month the ceiling collapses on their heads at night. The place is in a state of total disrepair. So what? Where do you think they'll run to if that happens? To us, of course. And even if they do, so what? Are my wife's parents not worthy of sheltering in a cabinet maker's house? Or am I completely out of my depth and only members of the royal family are allowed to stay here?" Diana theatrically clasped her hands. "Come to your senses, son. Have you seen your Alice, so to speak, with the naked eye?" "No, but I have. I've been watching her all evening, and I want to tell you something. That Alice of yours is a tramp. Don't you talk about her like that, Mom. Dad, I don't care about her. But what about you? Do you think your behavior at Walker's is normal too? Dad thought for a moment before answering. After all, he was a respectable man, and such pranks could have a bad effect on his business reputation. Finally, he said, Stefan, I'm sorry, but Alice is no match for you. Your mother is right. I'm not saying that she's bad. I'm just stating a fact. You're from different worlds, son. Different layers of the social pie, if you want to use that term. The kid's frozen in place. He didn't expect such a betrayal from his family. Well, then I'm from the other world too, Father. I'm leaving. I'm going to live at Walker's with Alice in their emergency housing. Are you kidding me? Well, let's see how many days you'll come running back, son, the mother said. Unless they feed you turkey every day. As soon as those words were out of her mouth, Diana immediately regretted what she had said. Her son looked at her with genuine contempt. I'd rather live with simple but honest farmers and the girl I love than to live under the same roof with snobs like you. The mother pressed her palm to her face in surprise, and the father, on the contrary, suddenly became furious. How dare you call us that? Your mother and I have done everything to give you the best toys, the best education, the best prospects. Mind you, Stefan, if you leave now, you won't get a penny of your inheritance. I'd rather give it all away to orphanages than feed some beggars. Not a single vein trembled on my son's stony face. Well, give it away. Give it all to the children. Maybe then, and really then, some good will come of this money. It's all tables and chairs. Good luck. Your low-life son goes to live with an unwanted farmer fiancé. Finita la comedy. With these words, Stefan bowed jokingly to his parents and, cursed by his father, quickly disappeared behind the doors of the manor. At that moment, Diana regretted for the first time in all her time what she had done with her son's life. But she could not change anything she had done. For a while, she stood in the middle of the living room, listening to her husband cursing at Stefan, and then slowly retreated to her bedroom. It took her a few hours to realize that they might never see their beloved child again. Despite her parents' protest, Stefan and Alice's wedding took place. Exactly 1 month after the young man left his father's house in a modest cottage, Walker celebrated a quiet but beautiful celebration. The house was decorated with many colorful balloons and real wildflowers. Alice loved them very much. The wedding may not have looked as luxurious as it could have if Stefan had his parents' money, but the general atmosphere of the festivities was favorable to him. Home cooking, friendly and so simple relatives of his young wife, nice sit-downs in the summer kitchen to the sound of a 6-string guitar, good old songs about people and their sincere love in the difficult post-war time. It is hard to say what in all this touched Stefan most of all, the warmth of the overall atmosphere, or the pulling feeling of regret deep in his heart. The only ones who were not among the guests of his and Alice's home that day were his parents. As hard as it was to admit, Stefan still missed his father and mother here. He would have loved to share this wonderful moment of growing up with them, to see the tears in Diana's eyes and the reassuring smile on Archie's face. But alas, they had made their own choices. 3 weeks before the ceremony, the Stones received a written invitation to their son's wedding in the mail. A simple envelope of heavy paper and a cheap card with white lilies could not convince the father of the family that their son has already grown up. In the end, even though the mother wanted to go to the wedding and forgive everything to her bad John, Archie decided otherwise. It's all right, let him suffer a little. It's good for him, the businessman said in an iron voice, and crumpled the thin card in his strong fist. He wanted his independence, his freedom, so let him enjoy it without our participation. So it turned out that his parents ignored Stefan's invitation and decided to teach him a lesson. They still hoped that he would come to his senses and leave his compromising fiancée and return home at the last moment, back to the family nest. However, 1 month passed, then the second, then the third, and the prodigal son did not return. Trouble came when he was not expected. One day, Archie unsuccessfully bathed in the pool and managed to catch bilateral pneumonia. The disease developed rapidly and in a few days literally baked the unfortunate businessman. Feeling that he himself is not able to cope with this overpowering disease, the man still decided to lie down for long-term treatment in a private clinic. where he promised to put him on his feet. But only a miracle, even for a very large amount of money, and did not happen. The condition of Stone Sr. every day only worsened. Then the doctors were forced to put him in an induced coma. Diana found herself all alone, face to face with her husband's business, and here the woman is not on a joke scared. There came a moment when the case of her husband and her entire family really became no one to pass. Suitable candidates, even for temporary management of the company, was not even close. And those who were available did not have the necessary for Stone's share of professionalism. The businesswoman was forced to put all production on pause. She hoped to somehow hold out until her husband will not get better. Unfortunately, as often happens in such situations, the forced downtime of the company was immediately used by Archie's unscrupulous partners. At the general board of directors, the general owner of the company was decided to recognize temporarily incapacitated, which meant that any of the owners of shares from among the managers of the company could safely sell their shares and profitably get out of the unprofitable business. As you know, sharks are the first to smell blood, and therefore, in just a couple of months, the company was completely torn up and sold off, as a result of which there was nothing left of the prestigious business of the Stones. Diana tried to fight as long as she could. She appealed to all her husband's friends and business partners from among those who just a couple of years ago proudly said that they were acquainted with the Stone family. But now everything has changed. No one wanted to hear about the businessman lying in a coma and had almost no prospects for recovery. The woman did not immediately realize the fact that her family was absolutely devastated. The money was barely enough to pay the bills for the house, but even this stream threatened to dry up at any moment. At the same time, the debts for Archie's treatment only increased, and soon, Diana was forced to mortgage their beautiful house just to be able to keep her husband alive. It was only now that the impoverished businesswoman realized the true cost of her cherished friendship of the elites and praised mutual assistance, which in fact turned out to be an empty sound. At that moment, when Diana was sitting on the alisand of her mortgaged house and bitterly lamented so unfairly treated her fate, in the pocket of her jacket suddenly rang the phone. "Hello," she sobbed into the receiver. "Who is this?" "Diana, it's Elizabeth, your son's wife Alice's mom. Remember her? You asked me about the turkey at the dinner party." There was silence for a moment, and then Stefan's mother literally howled into the phone. Of course I remember you, Elizabeth, sweetheart. How are you doing in there? How's John?" "God, if you only knew what's happened here. That's why we're calling Diana." Jacob took the phone from her. "We know what happened. We'll be there soon, and we'll bring Stefan and Alice. We've had enough of holding grudges against each other." The happy and grateful woman cried again. So Elizabeth had to comfort her emotional relative. A couple hours later, a huge pearl gray SUV pulled up to the Stones estate. Diana thought at first that her eyes were mistaken or that someone had mistaken the address, but nothing could convey her surprise when she saw her sister-in-law's parents behind the wheel of the expensive car. A second later, Alice and her husband easily slipped out of the car and rushed to her mother. Mommy, I'm so happy to see you. Forgive me for being stubborn, but I love you both so much." Stefan hugged his mother, covering her hot face with his son's kisses, but she just held him as tightly as her old arms would let her. John, my boy," she whispered back. Finally, when mother and son were able to pull away from each other, it was time for Diana to apologize to Alice and her parents. "Forgive me for all this masquerade. I was quite stupid then, though here's the age already, but apparently, God did not give intelligence, did not teach to distinguish for a lifetime where the gold and where guilt." Fortunately, Matchmakers did not hold a grudge against her. They specially came to help her and her husband in trouble, and at the same time reconcile, forgetting all the wrongs, and rejoice together in the happiness of their children. "Don't get upset, Diana," Jacob waved at her. "You know, it's not worth remembering what happened before. Why don't you tell me what happened here that you didn't even have a home? I've heard a little bit about Archie being in a coma and how your house is on the line, but I'd like a little more detail, so I'd know how to help you." The woman was very surprised at this turn. She looked questioningly at her son and daughter-in-law, but they only smiled. "I'll tell you, of course, but how can you help me, Jacob? With all due respect, it's a very nice car, but "Where did you get it, by the way?" The walkers only grinned, sensing the curiosity in their relative's voice. That's when it turned out that they were farmers, but on their accounts had a multi-million-dollar fortune. For many years, the Walker family owned the meat concern for the production and procurement of various types of meat. Few people knew that the meat kings are not accustomed to boast of their wealth, skillfully playing the role of simple-minded natives of the village. Keeping in the shadows, they, however, all these years successfully conducted their business, and in the same way accustomed and native daughter. Alice was accustomed, from childhood, in everything to rely solely on their knowledge, because she knew that money, the value of very fickle, and at any time, at the slightest mistake, they can be nothing left. That was why she had been so moved by Stefan's offer to pay for the laboratory destroyed in the fire. The rector of the university was one of the few people who knew very well what kind of family Alice Walker came from. Where Alice Walker came from, she could have paid off the repair of the laboratory with just one payment, but the rector would have thought of something else to get more money out of the rich student. But the guy's selflessness and his sincere willingness to help told the girl that she could always rely on this man, no matter how much money she had. Diana was frankly shocked by the story of Alice and her relatives. It turns out that it was they who fooled the family of cabinet makers with their modesty and simplicity, and not vice versa. She thanked God and fate itself for sending such wonderful and caring people to help her, and immediately repented of her own intolerance and snobbery. Having embraced and forgiven each other, the matchmakers began to act. First of all, the Walkers paid for Archie's operation, which was successful and allowed to bring the man out of a medically induced coma. The businessman was quite surprised to hear the side of his wife and newfound relatives. After learning that the matchmakers really saved his life, Zavialov also repented and sincerely apologized to his sister-in-law's family. After that, the meat kings threw all their energy, connections, and a lot of money to rebuild Stone's business. Archie, who was at this time in long-term rehabilitation, as he could for his part, helped to pull his own business out of bankruptcy. Of course, a lot of things were irretrievably destroyed, but they still managed to restore something. Now the spouses have a much smaller company, which helps them learn to live within their means and to value every ruble they earn more than before. But with their relatives, the Stones maintain the most reverent and kind relations. They often visit each other and do not hesitate to receive Walker in his own, now more compact, cottage, built, by the way, just next to the house of the children. In addition, both families are now expecting a new miracle, which should happen in the next 9 months. Alice turned out to be pregnant and will soon give her parents and parents of her favorite husband a wonderful grandson or granddaughter. The girl has not had an ultrasound yet, so everyone is in for a big surprise.